British Prime Minister David Cameron announced on Tuesday an independent inquiry into allegations that terrorism suspects were tortured. The three-member panel will focus on the mistreatment of British nationals and residents held at Guantanamo Bay after 9/11, and treatment of detainees transported to other countries where they were allegedly abused. Following his statement, he took questions from acting Labour Party leader Harriet Harman and other members of Parliament. This is 50 Minutes.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in paying tribute to the Royal Marine who died on Thursday, the soldier from the Royal Dragoon Guards who died yesterday, and the soldier from the 1st Battalion, the Mercian Regiment, who died from wounds sustained in Afghanistan in Birmingham yesterday. We should constantly remember the services and sacrifices made on our behalf by our armed forces and their families, and keep them in our thoughts and prayers, and thank them for what they do on our behalf. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on our intelligence services and allegations made about the treatment of detainees. For the past few years, the reputation of our security services has been overshadowed by allegations about their involvement in the treatment of detainees held by other countries. Some of these detainees allege they were mistreated by those countries. Other allegations have also been made about the UK's involvement in the rendition of detainees in the aftermath of 9/11. These allegations are not proven, but today we do face a totally unacceptable situation. Our services are paralysed by paperwork as they try and defend themselves in lengthy court cases with uncertain rules. Our reputation as a country that believes in human rights, justice, fairness and the rule of law, indeed for much of what the services exist to protect, risks being tarnished. Public confidence is being eroded, with people doubting the ability of our services to protect us and questioning the rules under which they operate. And terrorists and extremists are able to exploit these allegations for their own propaganda. Mr. Speaker, myself, the Deputy Prime Minister, the coalition government, we all believe it is time to clear up this matter once and for all. So today I want to set out how we will deal with the problems of the past, how we will sort out the future, and crucially how we can make sure the security services can get on and do their job to keep us safe. But first, let us be clear about the work they do. I believe we have the finest intelligence services in the world. In the past, it was the intelligence services that cracked the secrets of Enigma and helped deliver victory in World War II. They recruited Russian spies like Gordievsky and Matrokin, and they kept Britain safe in the Cold War. And they helped disrupt the provisional IRA in the 1980s and 1990s. Today, these tremendous acts of bravery continue. Every day, intelligence officers track terrorist threats and disrupt plots. They prevent the world's most dangerous weapons from falling into the hands of the world's most dangerous states. And they give our forces in Afghanistan the information they need to take key decisions. And they do this without any public or often even private recognition, and despite the massive personal risks they take to their own safety. We should never forget that some officers have died for this country. Their names are not known, their loved ones must mourn in secret. The service they've given to our country is not publicly recognised. We owe them and every intelligence officer in our country an enormous debt of gratitude. Yeah. And as Minister for the Intelligence Services, I'm determined to do everything possible to help them get on with the job they trained to do and that we desperately need them to do. However, to do that, we need to resolve the issues of the past. Mr. Speaker, while there is no evidence that any British officer was directly engaged in torture in the aftermath of 9/11, there are questions over the degree to which British officers were working with foreign security services who were treating detainees in ways they should not have done. About a dozen cases have been brought in court about the actions of UK personnel, including, for example, that since 9/11 they may have witnessed mistreatment such as the use of hoods and shackles. This has led to accusations that Britain may have been complicit in the mistreatment of detainees. The longer these questions remain unanswered, the bigger the stain on our reputation as a country that believes in freedom and fairness and human rights. That's why I'm determined to get to the bottom of what happened. The intelligence services also are keen publicly to establish their principles and their integrity. So we will have a single authoritative examination of all these issues. We cannot start that inquiry while criminal investigations are ongoing. And it's not feasible to start it when there are so many civil lawsuits that remain unresolved. So we want to do everything we can to help that process along. That is why we are committed to mediation with those who've brought civil claims about their detention in Guantanamo. And wherever appropriate, we will offer compensation. As soon as we've made enough progress, an independent inquiry led by a judge will be held. It will look at whether Britain was implicated in the improper treatment of detainees held by other countries that may have occurred in the aftermath of 9/11. The inquiry will need to look at the relevant government departments and intelligence services. Should we have realised sooner that what foreign agencies were doing may have been unacceptable and that we shouldn't have been associated with it? Did we allow our own high standards to slip, either systemically or individually? Did we give enough clear guidance to officers in the field? Was information flowing quickly enough from officers on the ground to the intelligence services and then on to ministers so we knew what was going on and what our response should be? Mr. Speaker, we should not be for one moment naive or starry-eyed about the circumstances our security services were working under in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. There was a real danger that terrorists could get their hands on a dirty bomb, chemical or biological weapons, or even worse. Threat levels had been transformed. The urgency with which we needed to protect our citizens was pressing. But let me state clearly, we need to know the answers. If things went wrong, why? And what we must do to uphold the standards that people expect. Mr. Speaker, I've asked Right Honourable Sir Peter Gibson, the former Senior Court of Appeal judge and currently the Statutory Commissioner for the Intelligence Services, to lead the inquiry. The three-member inquiry team will also include Dame Janet Paraskeva, head of the Civil Service Commissioners, and Peter Riddell, former journalist and senior fellow at the Institute for Government. I have today made public a letter to the inquiry chair setting out what the inquiry will cover, so Sir Peter Gibson can finalise the details with us before it starts. We hope it will start before the end of this year and will report within a year. This inquiry cannot and will not be costly or open-ended. That serves neither the interests of justice nor of national security. Neither can it be a full public inquiry. Of course, some of its hearings will be in public. However, we must be realistic. Inquiries into our intelligence services are not like other inquiries. There is some information that must be kept secret, information about sources, capabilities and partnerships. Let us be frank, it is not possible to have a full public inquiry into something that is meant to be secret. So any intelligence material provided to the inquiry panel will not be made public, and nor will intelligence officers be asked to give evidence in public. But that does not mean we cannot get to the bottom of what happened. The inquiry will be able to look at all the information relevant to its work, including secret information. It will have access to all relevant government papers, including those held by the intelligence services. And it will be able to take evidence in public, including from those who brought accusations against the government and their representatives and interest groups. Importantly, Mr. Speaker, the head of the civil service and the intelligence services will ensure the inquiry gets the full cooperation it needs from departments and agencies. So I am confident the inquiry will reach an authoritative view on the actions of the state and our services and make proper recommendations for the future. But, Mr. Speaker, just as we are determined to resolve the issues of the past, so we are determined to have greater clarity about what is and what is not acceptable in the future. That is why today we are also publishing the guidance issued to intelligence and military personnel on how to deal with detainees held by other countries. The previous government had promised to do this but didn't, and we're doing it today. It makes clear the following. 1. Our services must never take any action where they know or believe that torture will occur. 2. If they become aware of abuses by other countries, they should report it to the UK government so we can try and stop it. And 3. In cases where our services believe that there may be information crucial to saving lives, but where there may also be a serious risk of mistreatment, it is for ministers, rightly, to determine the action, if any, our services should take. My right honourable colleagues, the Foreign and Home and Defence Secretaries, have also today laid in the House further information about their roles in these difficult cases. Mr. Speaker, there is something else we have to address, and that is how court cases deal with intelligence information. Today, there are serious problems. The services cannot disclose anything that's secret in order to defend themselves in court with confidence that that information will be protected. There are also doubts about our ability to protect the secrets of our allies and stop them from ending up in the public domain. This has strained some of our oldest and most important security partnerships in the world, in particular that with America. Honourable members should not underestimate the vast two-way benefit this US-UK relationship has brought in disrupting terrorist plots and saving lives. So we need to deal with these problems. We hope that the Supreme Court will provide further clarity on the underlying law within the next few months. And next year we will publish a green paper which will set out our proposals for how intelligence is treated in the full range of judicial proceedings, including addressing the concerns of our allies. In this process, the Government will seek the views of the Cross-Party Intelligence and Security Committee, and I can announce today that I've appointed the Right Honourable Member for Kensington as the chair of that committee for the duration of this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, as we meet in the relative safety of this House today, let us not forget this. As we speak, Al-Qaeda operatives in Yemen are meeting in secret to plot attacks against us. Terrorists are preparing to attack our forces in Afghanistan. The real IRA are planning their next strike against security forces in Northern Ireland. And rogue regimes are still trying to acquire nuclear weapons. At the same time, men and women, young and old, all of them loyal and dedicated, are getting ready to work again around the world. They will be meeting sources, translating documents, listening in on conversations, replaying CCTV footage, installing cameras, following terrorists, all to keep us safe from these threats. We cannot have their work impeded by these allegations, and we need to restore Britain's moral leadership in the world. That is why we're determined to clear things up, and why I commend this statement to the House.
Harriet Harman.
Mr. Speaker, can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the Royal Marine who died on Thursday, the soldier from the Royal Dragoon Guards who died yesterday, and the soldier from 1st Battalion, the Mercian Regiment, who died from wounds sustained in Afghanistan yesterday. Our thoughts are with their grieving families. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for his statement. The use of torture is morally abhorrent and has no place in this country or in any civilised society. It's against our law in this country, and indeed is one of only a small number of offences which can be brought to court in this country no matter where in the world the offence was committed. It's a grave crime against humanity, and its prohibition is embodied in international law. There must be no hiding place for those who practice it, and no excuse for those who turn a blind eye to it. The United Kingdom should always be at the forefront of international efforts to detect and expose torture and to bring those responsible for it to justice. To play our part in leading the world, we must lead by example. Can I reiterate our condemnation of the US Guantanamo detention centre? It is clearly in breach of the law, which is why it is not on the US mainland, and why we made great efforts to secure the release of British nationals and British residents from Guantanamo, the only country who successfully brought back our citizens, having secured the release of all our citizens and all but one of our residents. Can I ask whether he is continuing the efforts that we made to bring back the final remaining British resident who is still detained? Can I agree with him that it's right that anyone who takes part in or who aids or abets torture is criminally liable and must be accountable for their actions and responsible to the criminal courts? There is, of course, a criminal investigation underway, which was referred to the police by the then Attorney General, Baroness Scotland. Will he confirm that that investigation will proceed to its conclusion independently and unimpeded? Can I agree with him that it's right that we have proper accountability for our security services? And can I reaffirm our support in that respect for the work of the Intelligence and Security Committee? And can I welcome his appointment of the Right Honourable Member for Kensington to chair the committee? He will undertake this important work with the integrity and commitment for which he is respected on all sides of the House, ensuring that the Intelligence and Security Committee plays its part in the strong framework of accountability, which includes accountability to ministers, to the heads of the agencies, to the 2 Commissioners for Intelligence Services, both retired High Court judges, the Independent Reviewer of Terrorism Legislation, Lord Carlisle, to whom I also pay tribute, and to the courts. Can I welcome the publication today of consolidated guidance for intelligence officers and the military on the questioning of suspects held overseas. That is a complex process which we committed to and which was underway, so we're pleased that that process has been completed with publication today. I hope that the administrative inquiry led by Sir Peter Gibson, who is one of the Intelligence Services Commissioners, which he has announced today, I hope that that administrative inquiry will help bring this matter to a conclusion. Can he tell the House a bit more about the terms under which the inquiry will be conducted? Can he tell the House what the inquiry will be able to do, which the Intelligence and Security Committee are not able to do? Will the inquiry have extra powers that the ISC don't have, and if so, what? He's told the House that the inquiry will be able to have some of its hearings in public. The ISC, of course, can. He's told the House that the inquiry will be able to look at all the information relevant to its work, including secret information. As I understand it, that is the case with the ISC. He says it will have access to all relevant government papers, including those held by the intelligence services. Well, I very much hope that that will be the case for the ISC. And he's also said it'll be able to take evidence in public, including from those who brought accusations against the government and their representatives and interest group. That is, of course, the case with the ISC too. He's concluded that it will have the full cooperation of the civil service and intelligence services. Of course, we hope that that is the case always with the ISC. He's confirmed that concluding the question of criminal responsibility will take precedence and that the administrative inquiry will start only when the criminal investigation and any proceedings thereafter are concluded. As he said, there are currently underway a number of cases in the civil courts where former detainees are taking action against members of the security services. Can he clarify more specifically the effect of the mediation in advance of the administrative inquiry on these cases? Can he confirm that these cases will not be superseded by the inquiry, which would need the consent of the plaintiffs and any future plaintiffs? And can he clarify in what circumstances compensation might be awarded if ultimately the courts would have found that there was no liability? Will the Prime Minister acknowledge the importance of the Human Rights Act, which enshrines in British law the European Convention of Human Rights and the protections afforded by Article 3, that no one shall be subjected to torture or to inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment? Will he affirm to the House today his support for the Human Rights Act, which ensures that where there is a breach of human rights, including torture, the right not to be tortured, the victim can take action in our courts rather than spending up to 7 years taking their case to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg? Can he reaffirm that it's never right for us to deport from this country those who would face torture in their home country? Can he confirm that to the House today? Can I invite the Prime Minister to reaffirm the UK's support for the work of the United Nations to end torture, including the Convention Against Torture and the 2002 Optional Protocol, which establishes an international system of inspections for places of detention? In order that the security services can proceed with their important work to protect this country with all inquiries concluded, can he confirm how long he expects the inquiry to take from when it starts work? He said it will take no longer than a year. Can he confirm how he believes that it will be able to start, which obviously we hope it will be able to start as soon as possible before the end of the year? Finally, can I endorse his support for the difficult and often dangerous work of our security services? The whole country has reason to be grateful to officers from all branches of the intelligence services for the fearless work they do across the world to keep this country safe.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her response and for those questions? In terms of her tribute to the security services, she's absolutely right to pay that tribute. And it's really because we revere and respect what the security services do, we want to get on with this inquiry and get it done. And that's why, to answer one of her questions, it is going to be limited to a year, and I hope it gets started before the end of this year. Let me take each of her questions in turn. I very much agree with her about torture. We have signed countless prohibitions against torture. We don't condone torture anywhere in the world, and we should be clear that information derived from torture is anyway useless. And we should also be clear we should not deport people to be tortured elsewhere, but we should, and my right honourable friend the Foreign Secretary will be doing this with the Home Secretary as well, redouble our efforts to make sure we can have guarantees from other countries so we can deport people to those countries knowing they will not be tortured. On Guantanamo, we are making efforts on behalf of the case she mentions. As she probably knows, that is a UK resident rather than a UK national. On her question about could criminal cases continue, the criminal case there is, continue unimpeded, yes, of course, that is a matter for the police and the prosecuting authorities. She raised a number of points about the Intelligence and Security Committee. I thank her for what she says about my right honourable friend, the member for Kensington. I think he will do an excellent job. I think it's an important committee. But in answer to her questions about why having this inquiry rather than just asking the Intelligence and Security Committee to do the job, I would say this. This inquiry is going to be led by a judge. It is going to be fully independent from Parliament, from party, from government, and I think that's what we need to get to the bottom of this case. I think also the very fact it's led by a judge will actually help to make sure we get this done properly. And I would say, while I have ultimate respect for the Intelligence and Security Committee, I have to say during the last Parliament there was such a runaround between the government and the Intelligence and Security Committee over the issue not of an inquiry but just the issue of publishing this guidance that I do really wonder whether she is taking the right line on this. Much better to have a judge-led inquiry in the way she hasn't taken a position. I'm very pleased to hear that. In terms of the cases, the civil cases, she asked a question about why try and mediate. The point is here, I think, we want to clear the decks. We want to get this done. We want to sort this problem out. So why not try and mediate the existing civil cases, roll them all up, deal with them, then hold the inquiry, get to the bottom of what happened, set out the guidance for the future, so we will have removed the stain on Britain's reputation and make sure our security services can get on with the work. I don't see an alternative to this. I think the government has gripped it quickly, rapidly, comprehensively, and I think that is the right answer, so we can move on.
Sir Mingus Campbell.
Anyone who is a member of the Intelligence Committee would want to join in the tributes to all three services which have been paid by the Prime Minister and the acting leader of the Labour Party. May I say to the Prime Minister, I think he has struck a very delicate balance in what are competing interests, and perhaps the most powerful reason for having a judge rather than the committee, apart from the volume of material which will have to be examined, is the primary need to ensure public confidence and an outcome in which the public can be satisfied everything has been done in a full and impartial manner to get to the bottom of these allegations.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for the way he puts that. I mean, public confidence is essential, and there are competing interests. I don't want to hide that from people. That is the reason for not having a full judicial inquiry, because we do want a judge-led inquiry, but at the same time, we do need to have regard to the importance of the security services, the work they do, and the fact that a lot of what they do has, by its very nature, to remain secret.
Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister referred to his hope that this inquiry could be established at the end of the year, or by the end of the year, if this mediation process had led to the cases somehow being presumably removed from the equation. Isn't that very naive? What possible incentive would people have to come to an agreement unless they're going to be given very large amounts of money? And at this time of public concern about the finances, can he clarify what he is actually proposing, how much money is going to be available, and what happens at the end of the year if the people don't accept a mediation process? Does no inquiry start?
I have to say to the honourable member, what would be naive is trying to mediate in public, which is what he's inviting me to do. I don't think that would be sensible. I mean, to try and answer his question as directly as I can, I think that there are two things that perhaps those involved in these cases want. One might well be compensation if they feel they have been mistreated and they want that to be dealt with, which mediation can deal with. The second point, which the inquiry goes to, is some recognition of what went wrong, if something went wrong, and what we're going to do about it. So I think actually this two-stage process, trying to do the mediation, then the inquiry, is the right answer.
Mr. Richard Ottaway.
I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, and in particular the warm and justified support he gave to the intelligence services. In the last Parliament, the Intelligence and Security Committee did two reports, neither of which were published. The first was into the rendition and interrogation of Binyam Mohammed, and the second was into the guidance and treatment of detainees. Can he confirm that both these reports will be made available to the inquiry? And secondly, could he confirm that the guidance which he is publishing today, is it the guidance that was in force for the last decade, or is it the revised guidance which, as recently as last April, the Home Office and the Foreign Office were objecting to?
My honourable friend served on the committee and knows its work extremely well. To answer his questions, the reports he refers to will be made available to the inquiry, that's right. In terms of the guidance we're publishing today, it's neither the past guidance nor the guidance the Intelligence and Security Committee looked at. It is indeed new amalgamated guidance, which is public, and I'd urge him to read it. We're not publishing the Intelligence and Security report in the last Parliament onto the last set of guidance, because I think that would be slightly misleading. It would be a report into guidance that no longer exists. So I think this is the right approach, and I'd ask him to have a look at the guidance and see what he thinks.
Hazel Blears.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, and in particular his support and reaffirmation for the very brave work of the security services. The Prime Minister will be all too well aware of the likely impact of these events that will be the subject of the inquiry on communities here in Britain. And I would ask him that as the inquiry progresses, to be very conscious of the need to explain and be as transparent as possible, and to be aware of the impact of our communities here in Britain of some of the allegations that may be made in relation to events which have occurred elsewhere.
I think the Honourable Lady makes an extremely good point, and one that all members actually can play some part in. I think that different communities in our country will welcome what has been said today as an effort to get to the truth, to get to the facts, to find out what happened, to make sure it can't happen again. I think that will be welcomed, and I'm sure that she will be able to play a part in that.
Mr. Andrew Tyree.
I warmly welcome the statement the Prime Minister has just made, which was a courageous and very thoughtful statement. And it is a huge step forward in this area that we should now have this inquiry, which can draw a line under the Sorry affair, which has been eroding public confidence in our security services, who do such good work on our behalf. Can the Prime Minister clarify that the remit that will be given to the committee, to the inquiry, will be broad enough to encompass all allegations of complicity in rendition, including rendition of flights, and the use of Diego Garcia and the transfer of prisoners in the theatre?
Yes, I can confirm that the inquiry will be able to look at all of those issues around rendition, extraordinary rendition, and indeed the case he mentions about Diego Garcia.
George Howarth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Also, as a former member of the Intelligence and Security Committee, can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement today? I think what he proposes to deal with the past is correct, and what he proposes for dealing with the future is correct. However, I do have some concerns about the present. There will be some cases that arise before the inquiry he referred to is established, whereby there may be some doubt about an issue that has arisen and the dangers involved to the public safety in this country. Can he give the House an assurance that where ministerial involvement is necessary, and I accept that is a good way forward, it will, in those sorts of cases, be dealt with speedily?
I think the Honourable Gentleman makes an important point. All the published guidance in the world can't deal with all the incredibly difficult circumstances that our brave intelligence officers find themselves in different parts of the world. The guidance is there as guidance. It's as clear as it can be, but I think it is right that there are circumstances where it's important that decisions are referred to ministers, because in the end ministers are accountable to this House and accountable in Parliament, and so are able to make those decisions. But his point is a very good one. If this happens, it may need to happen very speedily, and we're going to put in place arrangements so that can happen.
Mr. David Davis.
Can I commend the Prime Minister for coming to such a fast decision on this important issue and support what he had to say today, including his commendation to our intelligence services. Can I ask him to reiterate or reinforce what I think was underpinning much of what he had to say? Namely, one, that this tribunal will be able to follow the evidence wherever it goes. Two, that it will not just have access to people and papers, but also to in-camera court records which relate to this. And three, when it comes to its conclusions, it will be the decision of the tribunal and the tribunal alone what is published in the national interest.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for those points and for his support over this issue. I do think it was important to reach a speedy conclusion, because this, as I say, has been hanging over us for too long. We're not dealing with issues that we've inherited from 2007 and 2008 and 2009. These go back some way back after 9/11, and I think it's important we grip them. In terms of his three questions, two questions I think it was. First of all, can the inquiry look at court records? I am sure the answer to that is yes. In terms of what will be made public, it will be for Sir Peter to draw up his report. He can follow the evidence exactly where it leads him. He can look at secret documents. He can look at all the intelligence information. The report will be to me, and in the end, as the Prime Minister and Minister for the Intelligence Services, I have to make a decision about what should be put in the public domain. It's my intention to publish the report. That's what I want to do. But I have to have regard for what is in the national interest and in our security interest, and that's something I'll have to decide on.
Mr. David Winnick.
On the eve of the 5th anniversary of 7/7, no one in this House is likely for one moment to underestimate the acute terrorist threat. But is it not a matter of great concern that one of the most senior judges in the country, the Master of the Rolls, said this year in court that British security officials appear to have a dubious record when it comes to human rights and coercive techniques? And doesn't the experience in Northern Ireland demonstrate time and time again during the 30 years that torture only helps terrorism, certainly doesn't help to undermine it?
Well, first of all, I'd say to the honourable gentleman that there's no suggestion that British agents or officials or security service personnel were in any way involved directly in torture themselves. I think that is important we get that straight. That is not what is being said. But his general point that we do not keep ourselves safe and secure, we don't promote the things we believe in if we drop our standards, that is of course right. But I would remind him, he and I both served on the Home Affairs Select Committee, which met in those very difficult days straight after 9/11. And I remember then, and I'm sure he does too, the very great pressure there was on everybody to try and find out what was going to happen next. And we should remember, as we do this inquiry, the pressures that were on security services across the world to try and prevent a repeat of those dreadful events on 9/11.
Sir Alan Beath.
As the Prime Minister, if the previous findings of the Intelligence and Security Committee on all these matters will be the building blocks partly of this inquiry, and will he concede that the task he has rightly reserved to ministers is the classic moral dilemma when, having taken every possible step to ensure that in no way has Britain assisted or abetted torture, Britain has to decide how to relate to the services of regimes whose conduct we do not trust, but who may hold information vital to the safety of the people of this country?
The Prime Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman is certainly right that the previous IC findings will be enormously helpful to the inquiry. On the issue of what it is ministers would have to decide, let me try and clarify this a bit further, although honourable members can read the guidance published today. It's not that ministers would be consulted in cases of torture. Torture is ruled out completely. What this difficult case is referring to is in cases of so-called mistreatment. There's no proper definition of mistreatment. It can range from things that we would probably consider to be torture, like waterboarding, but it could also range to things like, an inappropriately sized cell. And that's why there is some need, in the sort of very difficult circumstances one of our agents could be faced by, to have that level of discretion. That's the sort of moment that we have to try and consider and get right and not be over-bureaucratic about it.
Keith Vaz.
Can I welcome the establishment of this inquiry and the appointment of the Right Honourable Gentleman for Kensington. The Prime Minister is right to praise the work of the security services. Will he also acknowledge the work done by the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Unit? And given that he has accepted as a former distinguished member of the Home Affairs Select Committee one recommendation of the committee, the establishment of the National Security Council, will he look at the second recommendation in this area, which is for the government to allow intercept evidence in court proceedings?
I am very keen on recommendations of the Home Affairs Select Committee, also the issue of a border police force. I think another excellent recommendation that the committee has made. In terms of intercept, we all, I think, want to see that happen. We all want to see more those accused of terrorism to go through the court process, to be tried, to be convicted, to be imprisoned. And intercept evidence would be hugely helpful. But what I would say to honourable members, it is extremely difficult to do. I remember in the last Parliament, one of the greatest enthusiasts apart from myself, of intercept evidence being available in court was the former honourable member for Folkestone, Michael Howard. He was on the committee and hasn't yet found a way to make this happen. So let's not overestimate how easy this is to be done. It's not easy at all.
Mr. John Redwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the Prime Minister's approach. Does he agree with me that recent years have shown that targeted surveillance, targeted intelligence is much more successful at defending a free society than an ever greater extension of guards, guns and gates? And this is why his work is so important, because we need intelligence services that command universal respect and get to the truth as quickly as possible.
Well, I think my right honourable friend is completely right about this. What we need to have is the robust and hard-nosed defence of our liberty, and that means having security services that can work properly, and that's why this announcement today, I think, is important. What we don't need is what I would call ineffective authoritarianism, which I don't want to get political, as it's not a political day, but I think we did have a bit too much of under the previous regime.
Isla Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Holding the executive to account is supposed to be the role of Parliament, not the role of judges or independent inquiries. Does he therefore not think it's about time the Intelligence and Security Committee should be made a committee of this House, appointed by this House, not one appointed by him and reporting to the Prime Minister?
I'm very happy, as I've only been doing this job for a few weeks, to look at this issue. I know it's been discussed before. Can we change the nature of the Intelligence and Security Committee? Can we help it to do its job in an even better way? I'm very happy to look at that. But I don't think for a moment we should believe that actually it's the ISC that should be doing this piece of work. I think for public confidence, for independence from Parliament, party and government, I think it's right to have a judge-led inquiry. And all I'd say to honourable members opposite who take a different view, as I say, these events relate to a time of 2002, 2003. If the ISC was the right answer, why on earth didn't they come up with it in the previous years?
Ben Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The gathering of intelligence is not the same as the gathering of evidence, and sometimes intelligence is required in a much more urgent and hostile environment. After this inquiry is over, could the Prime Minister give an assurance to the House that he will think very carefully before reintroducing any extra guidelines or regulations onto our intelligence services that may prevent them doing the job they do so well at the moment?
Prime Minister.
Well, I know my honourable friend has experience of these issues and thinks about them a lot. All I would say is that there's no doubt there are serious allegations into what happened in the past, and I don't want to preempt the report, but one of the things the report needs to do is ask, how do we stop this happening again in future? One way we stop this happening in future is by having better guidance so that our security services have a clearer understanding what is and is not acceptable. Now, that isn't easy. And inevitably, some people will say the guidance is quite bureaucratic. I totally accept and understand that, but you've got to have some way of trying to prevent what happened from happening again.
Valerie Vaz.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and to ask if he's aware of how many civil cases there are and if he knows whether what would happen, what the position would be if the claimants don't wish to go to arbitration?
There are about a dozen cases, as I understand it, and obviously it would be better if the mediation is successful, those cases are rolled up and we go into the inquiry. Clearly the police have a view, and a very good, obvious view, that the criminal case shouldn't be ongoing. Until, the inquiry shouldn't start until the criminal case is completed. I would hope the civil cases can be as I say, dealt with through mediation. If they aren't, we'll have to come back to the issue and look at what's appropriate.
Bernard Jenkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I commend the Prime Minister for his excellent statement, which I'm sure will be greeted with some relief by the intelligence services themselves, not least because he is standing by the control principle, which is so important to be restored. That is, that intelligence lent to us by our allies should not be passed or leaked or released through the courts in a way that has been happening, has been damaging our intelligence relationships. But will he give an assurance that if it becomes necessary to amend the operation of the Human Rights Act, he will not flinch from doing that in order to protect our relationships with our allies?
On the point about thank you for that question. On the point about the intelligence services, they do welcome the statement today. Obviously, I've worked very closely with them on this issue. I mean, from their perspective, this is not without difficulties. It's not without some painful examination that's going to take place, but it does get them to a better situation, one where we can deal with this stain on Britain's reputation and, as I say, allow their officers to get on with the vital work they do. He's right about the control principle. It's a very simple point. If other countries don't feel we will protect their intelligence information they give us, they won't give it to us anymore. And if they don't give it to us anymore, we won't be as effective at keeping people safe. So it is vital. I don't think it actually has anything to do, the control principle, with the Human Rights Act. But we're going to address this through a green paper next year, which can be debated and discussed in the House, because it's not easy. It is not easy to find a way in an open, liberal democracy to work out how to protect secret information. But we've got to do it.
Ian Paisley.
I too welcome the statement by the Prime Minister and indeed pay tribute to the gallant, dangerous and largely unreported work by our security services that have saved the lives of many individuals, including people in this very House. Could I ask the Prime Minister, therefore, is it possible for him to ensure that the inquiry is short and sharp and is not allowed to drift beyond the remit that he has outlined today in his statement? That it is not allowed, therefore, to sap the morale of our security services, who can be put down by inquiries that are largely used by propaganda tools by their enemies. And on the judicial proceedings, can the Prime Minister ensure that, like the last administration, he will consult and he will ensure that the Right Honourable Member for Kensington consults with the Privy Council members from Northern Ireland on security and intelligence matters to ensure that their voice is heard on these points?
Well, I'm sure the Right Honourable Member for Kensington will have heard what the Honourable Gentleman has said. In terms of the assurances he seeks from me, will it be a short and sharp inquiry? Yes, it is limited to a year. Do we want to make clear it won't sap the morale of intelligence officers? Absolutely. That is the purpose for getting on with this within the first couple of months of a new government, is to try and clear this issue away. It's not easy, it will take some time, but better to start now with an ordered process, the mediation, the public inquiry, the guidelines for the future, to try and put our security services and our safety on a much better footing.
Tom Brake.
Can the Prime Minister confirm whether, if the inquiry team believes that intelligence material should be put into the public domain for the credibility of the inquiry and it is safe to do so, that he will allow this to happen?
It's a very good question, and the answer is, if it's safe to do so, yes, of course. I'm not, this is not some political witch hunt to get at ministers from a previous government. That's not what this is about. Likewise, it's also not about trying to cover up bad things that might have happened. It's about trying to get to the bottom of what happened, to explain the context, to get the information out there. So there'll be no intent to do that. But I have to have regard, as the Minister for the Intelligence Services, in the end, about what is safe to release. And that's a responsibility I've got to take very seriously.
Mr. Geoffrey Robinson.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware from the general tone of questions this afternoon that his statement is very welcome throughout this House and he's to be commended for it? Can he, on a specific point, confirm that the 46 documents, about which there's been a lot of discussion originating with the CIA, will be made available, of course, to the inquiry itself, but could be also available more widely?
Well, the point is the inquiry can follow the evidence where it leads, but let me be clear, this is not an inquiry into what the US authorities have done. This is an inquiry into what UK personnel may or may not have done. I think that's important we get that straight. The stain, if you like, on The British situation is these allegations of complicity, of what our personnel may have witnessed or in some way been complicit in. That's what we have to deal with. We're not trying to have some great inquiry into the practices and procedures of other intelligence services. That's not what the inquiry is about.
Jane Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome my right honourable friend's statement today, and it will be even more warmly welcomed by Mrs Zinira Armour and her children, who are the family of Shaka Armour, the last UK resident in Guantanamo Bay, and they are my constituents. They are British citizens and they've suffered very greatly over the last 8 years. Will he agree with me that it adds urgency to the case, that in the event that the inquiry decides it would like to take evidence from Mr Armour, it is ideal that he is available to give it?
I think the Honourable Lady makes a very good point on behalf of her constituents. As I said in the statement, there will be opportunities for public evidence to be given to this inquiry, including from those who are making allegations against UK personnel. I think it's important that is available, but as I said, a lot of this inquiry won't be in public because of the nature of what it is investigating.
Mr Dennis McShane.
Thank you. I congratulate the Prime Minister and wish him well with the inquiry. I think it's the 5th set up since 9/11 in Iraq, and if this one can bring some closure, draw a line, we'd all be a lot happier. But on the mediation point he's making, can part of that be to encourage these gentlemen not then to go out and around the country supporting Islamist and jihadi principles and practices, which are a real problem, because if they are free in our country, then it's better if they don't encourage other people to do things that are not very helpful.
Well, the Honourable Member and I will probably agree about the needing to confront and defeat those who put extremist Islamist arguments. That's something we have to do for the good of our country, for the good of the world. He asked the question, can an inquiry draw a line under this? All I would say is I don't think there has yet been a proper attempt to look systematically at this set of allegations about whether British personnel were in any way complicit because of the things that they witnessed or were involved in. That hasn't been done. It needs to be done. And I'd ask people who disagree, what's the alternative? Do we really just want to let the civil cases roll on and have year after year people in our security services jammed up with paperwork, trying to fight these cases? Much better to try and clear them away, get to the bottom of it, and then make sure they can get on with the job that they do so well.
Mr Christopher Leslie.
I think many honourable members on all sides will understand the approach to mediation in some of these civil cases, but will the Prime Minister accept that it's a bit more controversial when it comes to the compensation, particularly if no wrongdoing on behalf of the security services has been proven? Will he therefore agree at least to have some level of transparency after these processes are done, publishing perhaps the amounts of compensation, or at the very least not exempting from the Freedom of Information Act that information?
The Honourable Member is right that this is a difficult process, and nobody wants to pay compensation that isn't warranted. But there are two things I would say to him. One is, it is getting increasingly difficult for the security services to defend themselves in these civil actions, because the information they would use to defend themselves is then made public, which they don't want to happen, so they don't bring the information forward, so they can't win the case. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I would say to the honourable gentleman is that the point about mediation is it is a private process, and if you start advertising your mediation strategy, or indeed your mediation outcome, even if you describe your outcome, that's not necessarily going to make mediation very easy in future.
Wishart.
And can I also very much welcome the statement and find it extraordinary that after the Labour years it's a Conservative Prime Minister that's making this. The Prime Minister says he doesn't want to be political, but maybe I can encourage him just a little bit, because given the Labour parties in government's refusal to accept claims of torture and their various attempts to try and make this all go away, does he not believe that former ministers and Secretary of States should appear before this inquiry?
Well, it will be a matter for the inquiry who they want to see as witnesses, and they will be able to summon who they want. But let me just stress again, this is not some attempt to sort of draw former ministers into some great argument. That's not what it's about. I mean, if the inquiry wants to talk to ministers because of asking what information made it to departments and what didn't, of course they can. Above all, this is a clear attempt to get to the bottom of what happened in those very difficult years, a very difficult time, where allegations have been made that, as he says, need to be addressed, and I'm pleased that the new government has set up, I found, I think, the right process for doing that.
Last but certainly not least, Mr Mark Durkan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for acknowledging dimensions of this issue that the previous government either denied or dithered on. But can he also accept that not all of us can join in the canonisation of the security services, because many of us believe that the security services were complicit in some of the worst crimes carried out by both Loyalists and Republicans in Northern Ireland. But can the Prime Minister address the peculiar sequence that now seems to be in front of us of mediation, compensation, then investigation by this inquiry, and then presumably adjudication and publication thereafter? Might that not be a self-frustrating sequence?
Well, I hope that it isn't. I mean, we have spent some time looking at this issue, trying to find the right way, as I say, to deal with the issue, and we think that mediation followed by the judge-led inquiry is the right way to get to the bottom of it. On his point about the security services, I would just ask him to take a wide view and look across the years, across the history, and across what the security services do today, not just in Northern Ireland, but right across our world, to help keep people in this country and indeed in this House safe. And I think we should end on the note of paying tribute to brave men and women who are never known about, some of whom die in this cause and cannot be mourned properly by their families, to thank them for what they do on our behalf.
On C-SPAN tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu talks about the Middle East peace process during a visit to New York. Then a discussion about